Adverbial clauses. Adverbial clauses. This is part 2, and here we look at contrasting and concessive clauses. Alright, so let's look at although, which is the one of the most common. Although he has ample money, Alex doesn't seem content. Now what we have here is a contrast, and it's a surprising contrast because ample means that you have plenty of it, so he has plenty of money, but he doesn't seem content, and content means peacefully happy. So in the real world it would be surprising that you've got plenty of money but you're not peaceful and happy. In truth, perhaps it's not surprising, but we treat it as if it is surprising from a conventional point of view. You can reverse the clauses. Here the subordinate clause was first, and here's the main clause. Now you can put the main clause first, the conjunction in the middle, and then the subordinate clause. When the subordinate clause comes first, you will place the comma after it. When the main clause comes first, it's actually kind of optional with contrasting and concessive conjunctions, but for the sake of consistency when it comes to subordinating clauses, we won't. If you want to watch a video on that, you can see the video on subordinating clauses. Here we see a similar thing. Again, it's surprising. Although small, the car was certainly powerful. The assumption would be here that a small car would not be powerful, but here we see that it is. This is a clause. It's a slightly tricky case. It's what we call, there's an implied subject here, so implied subject. So we haven't stated it directly that it's although the car was, or it was small, the car was certainly powerful. We haven't stated it directly, but given the simplicity of this clause, it wasn't necessary. It was simply, we understood that that's what it would be. Though can also function like although, so there's no difference here. There are cases where though can function differently, but we'll look at that in a moment. So now we look at concession. Here we were looking at surprising contrast. Now we're going to look at concession. Concession's a bit different because you actually say one thing in one clause and then contradict or say the opposite in the next clause. Perhaps we'll just go back to the first case here. So he has lots of money. We're not saying here that he doesn't have lots of money. We're saying that he's just not happy. So there's no real contradiction there. But here we're saying, although I agree with you, I have to disagree with your point about education. So in this clause, I agreed. In this clause, I disagree with you. So there really is a contradiction here. There really is what we call a concession, where you detract from or take away from your original statement. Let's look at another case. Sarah claimed to be happy, although she was always complaining. So if you're happy, you wouldn't complain. They directly contradict each other. This is an unhappy person. Yet in the first clause, you claim that she was happy. You see, here you're saying that he doesn't seem happy, but over here you just said he had lots of money. You didn't say that he wasn't happy. So that is the difference between a contrast or a surprising contrast and a concession. Concessions, there's a real direct contradiction between what you're saying. Let's look at the next one here. Just be careful with whereas. Whereas cannot be used. Wherever we see although and though in these cases, whereas will not work there. We will see where it can be used a bit later in this video. Okay, now though can be used at the end of a sentence, but this is quite informal, as you'll see. I generally agree with you. I have to disagree with your point about education though. Right, so this is probably not well suited to writing, particularly in a formal context, but when you speak it's quite normal. Let's look at the next. I'll just actually maybe point out that I could have where the purple clause is, or the subordinate clause, I could have placed the blue clause there, the main clause, and moved the purple one behind. It wouldn't matter. So it could have been, I have to disagree with your point about education, comma, I generally agree with you though. So though just simply goes at the end regardless of the other two clauses in this informal form that it's in. Okay, while is similar to although, so while I generally agree with you, I have to disagree with your point about education. So it's exactly the same as although, but it's regarded as slightly more formal, or usually is more formal. Be careful with while, because it can also be a conjunction of time, meaning two things with duration happening at the same time. For example, I eat crisps while I watch TV. So you're watching TV and eating crisps at the same time, and both of these actions have duration, so they go on for a while together at the same time. So don't make the mistake of using it here, because it will be confused with in this second position, because it, after the clause, because it will be mistaken for the time clause, time conjunction. Sorry. All right, here we look at despite and in spite of. These are actually prepositions, although that's a fairly technical point because they look like conjunctions. Despite her love of Switzerland, Anna emigrated to Australia. This is, the grammar here is fairly important, because what we have here actually is a noun. This is just a determiner. It's just saying who possesses the love. So it's really love, despite love of Switzerland is really what we're saying here. So this is a noun. And so you can understand that after despite we need a noun. Here we have a gerund. Actually, that's not such a good line, so I'll try that again. So here we have a gerund. A gerund is when a verb acts like a noun. So grammatically, you could say that we have a noun here as well. And then despite the fact that what you have here is a noun clause. So this is basically a noun as well. So in each of these cases, we have, I should say that a noun clause is when you have that followed by subject and verb. So that's essentially a noun. So noun, noun, and noun, even though they are in different forms. So the point being, after despite, you want to have a noun. And that goes for in spite of as well. And here as well, in spite of. So there's no change. So in spite of her love of Switzerland, so on and so forth, and in spite of loving Switzerland, and in spite of the fact that she loves Switzerland. In spite of behaves just like despite, just it's obviously 3 words instead of 1, but it also needs to be followed by a noun. Okay, now moving to the next point. While or whereas. While I like rainy nights, I despise rainy mornings. Now when we use while, we'll need to usually compare two things. So here we have, or contrast two things. So I like and I despise, which is another way of saying hate. So like here, hate there, or dislike. And then here it's rainy nights, and here we've got morning. So this is what you'll need when you use whereas or while in this form. I like rainy nights, here I despise rainy mornings. Let's look at another example of the two things being contrasted. Whereas David is into economics, Lisa prefers physics. So we see the same thing again. Here we have David, here contrasting with Lisa. David likes economics, Lisa prefers physics. So he's into it, which means he likes it. Prefers, of course, means likes it when compared to other things. Now, here we actually have a sentence which I might somewhat dispute its validity. I'll put that red line underneath there, and I'll just maybe put a red dot in front so that you're also see that I'm questioning whether it's actually correct. Despite rainy mornings, while I like rainy nights. You can do it, but again, you have that conflict with the time conjunction where you have two things of duration. Like I said before, I eat crisps while watching TV or while I watch TV. So you could be confused with a time conjunction there. So maybe better to avoid it. Whereas is fine. Now so Lisa prefers physics, whereas David is into economics. Whereas will happily go into this position here after the main clause. But a lot of people want to put a comma here. I'll do the comma in red, so I'll leave it up to you. I think technically when you lead with the main clause followed by a subordinating conjunction, a subordinate clause, really technically I think no comma, but you can see very clearly that a lot of people do this, put this comma here. So for that reason it's acceptable. And finally we have even though. And this is just exactly the same as although, but it's slightly stronger. So there's a little bit more emphasis. So it's like, even though he has ample money, Alex doesn't seem content. So just a little bit more emphasis or stress on this fact here. Okay, and that's all for adverbial clauses, contrast and concession.